The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Mute Bob. Mute Bob. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Lossman, and I'm Communications Coordinator at TechSoup Canada. I'd like to welcome and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Using QuickBooks to Audit-Proof Your Organization. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly introduce you to TechSoup Canada. Our mission is to help nonprofits use technology effectively, and we accomplish this in two ways. The first is to make technology products more affordable through our technology donations program. We partner with tech companies such as Microsoft, Adobe, and Symantec, and offer their products as either an outright donation or at a significant discount for charities, nonprofits, and libraries across Canada. Membership is free, and it gets you access to donated and discounted software from more than 30 tech companies. Through this program, we've helped over 31,400 nonprofits save more than $362 million in tech investments. The second way we try to help nonprofits use technology effectively is by creating and curating nonprofit tech resources. We write blogs, curate content on social media, and host events and webinars like this one to help nonprofits learn more about the technologies that can help them in their day-to-day work. So if there's ever a topic you'd like to learn more about, please let us know. We are always eager to get feedback from our members. For today's webinar, you can use the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen to change your audio settings, enter your questions, or chat with us. At the end of the webinar presentation, we will have a formal Q&A session where I'll ask questions to the speaker on your behalf. Just a reminder, you are on mute, so if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to chat to us in the question box. Also note that this webinar is being recorded and we will upload the video on our website shortly. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, Bob Wang and Jean Elwell. Bob Wang is the president at Legacy Advantage. Prior to Legacy, he worked at KPMG doing nonprofit audits and reviews. Currently, he's the treasurer at the Vancouver Fringe Festival. Bob is passionate about helping nonprofits achieve success. He believes when compliance is a non-issue, nonprofits will have more time and energy to focus on fulfilling their destinies. And Jean recently joined Legacy Advantage as manager of the Vancouver office, where she oversees and coaches employees to provide more valuable information and advice to clients. Prior to her current position, Jean had a successful CPA practice specializing in nonprofit entity and charity review engagements and audits. Jean has been involved in many nonprofit boards of governance over her career, most often as a treasurer, and believes that the key to success for charities and nonprofits is through education. So now we will pass it over to you, Bob, and you can take it from there.
Hello, everyone. Oh, Ben, can you see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I have Jean here with me. First of all, I want to say great job to TechSoup. A lot of our clients use TechSoup to get discounted software. So great shout out to you guys, and keep doing what you're doing. So today we're going to talk about how to use QuickBooks to ensure your nonprofit is audit proof. Preparing for year end is very important as we're approaching that season, and many of you are going to have either CRA audits or financial statement audits. So this one is addressing more of the latter. So my name is Bob Wang. This is Jean Elwell.
Hi.
And we love charities.
We do. Oh, okay. So as Bob mentioned, there's probably two types of audit that you're going to come across. You are probably all familiar with the year-end audit that comes every year. And the other thing you might come across is the CRA audit, where they want to make sure that you qualify for the charitable status.
Okay, so the agenda for today, we're gonna talk about a few things here. We're gonna discuss adequate controls around cash management. We're gonna talk having a knowledgeable board, have a manageable and understandable chart of accounts, proper internal controls over expenses, good documentation and compliance of grants that you might receive, and do not commingle externally restricted funds, how to actually keep the records, and there's some common errors. So, you know, we feel like if you follow all these instructions and have proper controls in place, you will have a very, very smooth financial statement audit at year end. The first one is about having adequate controls around cash management. Basically, use less cash.
So yeah, you want to limit as much as you can the use of cash. And one of the first and most obvious things, and charities always hear, is segregation of duties. So this is really important because often in charities you will have a limited number of volunteers. And I was telling Bob about a review I did last year where they had a charity and they did a fundraising event, and they had the bookkeeper collect the cash at the event, and then the bookkeeper counted the cash by herself and then prepared the cash deposit and also reconciled the bank. So when I was doing the review, I noted that this cash did not get deposited to the bank for 4 months. And when it did get deposited, we weren't sure that the amount that was counted was the amount that got deposited. So in this case, we had a bookkeeper who, and this happens all the time in charitable organizations, is people are around cash. And because they're around cash, we always assume that they are good people, but they think, okay, I'll just borrow this money and I'll pay it back next Tuesday. And their morals tend to get a bit blurred and they become tempted. So the big key is avoid having them with cash. And of course, if you do have someone counting cash, always make sure there's 2 people counting cash together and that you separate who counts the cash and who makes the bank deposit and reconciles the bank.
So Jean, just a quick question here.
Yeah.
How many people in the entire process should be involved in this cash collection? So you have a fundraiser event, you know, there should be a cash counter.
Yep.
Or 2 cash counters. Does the depositor, can that be a cash counter as well, or a separate person?
It can, well, and here's where you have to, there's no firm rules, because if you've got a really small charity and you've only got a couple of volunteers, you have to do the best you can. So the important thing is to have whoever's counting the cash watched by someone else and signing it off, so that you've got some little signed form that says this is how much cash we collected, so that someone in the future, ideally a third person, or at least different from the person depositing the cash, would say, yes, this amount of cash made it to the bank. Does that make sense?
And then the person that records the cash into the accounting system, is that going to be a different person, or can that be a cash counter as well?
Well, that should be a different person, but again, if you have a tiny little organization, it gets
resources are definitely
exactly.
constrained.
You have to do the best you can.
So generally speaking, you know, take checks as much as possible, use credit cards, and increase online donations. Now, I know you might be thinking, you know, there's fees involved, but you know, yeah, there is, but then you sleep better at night and you reduce the temptation from your volunteers. So just so you guys know, PayPal actually has a non-profit rate. So if you call them and say, we want to take donations through PayPal, and you provide evidence that you are a nonprofit, they can actually give you a heavily discounted rate. That could be a solution as well. For our clients, we use Rotessa and Pluto. They're great for recurring donors. And we basically set our clients up as pre-authorized donors, so that, you know, the donors would basically sign a pre-authorized agreement, and then every month the same amount comes out. And these are relatively low fee as compared to PayPal, because you only pay $1 a transaction as opposed to a percentage of revenues. So here are the links if you are interested. Pluto, you can go to pluto.com. Rotessa, you can go to rotessa.com. Basically, the donors would sign a pre-authorized debit authorization, which gives you, and then give you a void check, and then you can automate these donations. And the best of all is they can all synchronize with QuickBooks Online, which makes your reconciliation a lot easier. So here's a quick example that one of our clients had implemented. So they are a nonprofit childcare society. The problem is they always have post-dated checks, but sometimes the the dollar written on the post-dated check isn't always the same as the fees for the month, because there might be a pro D day, the kids might miss a day, or all these extra things come up, and so the executive director ends up spending a lot of her time chasing for these small dollar amounts. So what ended up happening is we implemented Rotessa, and all the parents signed their pre-authorized debit agreements, and basically whenever there's a small charge, the amount just basically gets pulled from their accounts, and everybody's happy, less paperwork, and all of that gets processed through QuickBooks.
Nice. Okay, so the second point we wanted to touch on is, and this is really important, is make sure your board is knowledgeable, because the proper governance is the foundation to staying audit proof. And for those of you that don't know, the CRA has a fabulous section for charities, and I've included the link here, and this just goes to the main charities page. But on this page, you'll find all sorts of things. You'll find tools for directors. You'll find everything that you need to have on the charitable receipt. You will find setting up a charity. It's just a really good section here. Now, I found in my practice that most of the charities that I audited or did reviews for were governed by a group of people who were very attached to the cause of the charity and very passionate about the cause of the charity, and not necessarily a lot of financial background. So this happened a lot, and I used to find that, whenever I ran into people at these events and they'd say, "Are you a CPA? Can you be our treasurer?" It's usually the next question that comes along. So you want to find a treasurer who can read and make sense of the financial statements to the board, so that the board can make appropriate financial decisions and stay on track. So yeah, as I said, most people are on boards not because they buy into the mission, not because they're business people. The other thing is that charities are different from profit organizations. Their aim is to do good as opposed to make a profit. In fact, profit motivation is discouraged by the donors. So if I'm a donor to a charity, I want to give you $10,000, but I want to make sure that you spend the money on what I want you to. I don't want you to keep the money or keep anything back. I want it all to be gone. And likewise, you'll often find that government grants will not give you money if you have funds left in your operating surplus. So the other thing that you want your board to do is to set a budget. So you can set a budget based on the prior 3 years, and do that on a projected way, knowing what you know for the years to come. And you can use QBO to keep you on track here. Here's another little orphan point at the bottom. Remember that when you're using your minutes, you make sure that they are signed. Board minutes need to be signed. So if you're gonna be, and here's just a little screenshot from QuickBooks, and this shows you how to set your budget. So you just wanna go to reports. Oh wait, no, this is not setting the budget. This is how to print your budget. So you're gonna go to reports, and you're gonna go to budgeting, and then you're gonna compare budget versus actuals. And this will give you a report that you can compare monthly at the board meeting and let you know how close you are to meeting your targets.
I'm just gonna add a point here is sometimes the budgets are tracked outside of QuickBooks or in an Excel spreadsheet. Again, that's fine if it works for you, but if you wanted to automate that process a bit and I guess digitize it, you can actually add the budget directly into QuickBooks by going to the gearbox here, and then click on budgeting. And this is where you actually enter the month-to-month budget. And then as Jean said, if you wanted to see the budget versus actual reports, you would go to reports and then budget versus actual.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, here's another one. I see this a lot. So this is, you want to make sure that you have a manageable chart of accounts. In a lot of the charities we've looked at, the history seems to have been that every time a person on the board wants to look at, say, how many things have we purchased from this supplier, instead of doing a report that searches for that amount, they create a separate chart of accounts for that, or a separate account for that supplier. Same with classes. We have one organization that has classes. They also have a separate account for each class. So they end up having this huge 4-dimensional spreadsheet. So the important thing with your chart of accounts is you want to keep it simple. And this is how you want to do it. So in order to keep it unwieldy, you are going to start with the end product. So what is the information that you want? And the first thing you want to do is figure out who your users are. So one of your users is going to be the CRA. So you obviously want to make sure your reports give you that information. But the more important one for you is the board. What does the board want? So it's sometimes a useful place to start to take the year-end financial statements and see this is at least what we're required to report, and then tweak it a bit to figure out what the board wants, and then go backwards and try to limit the chart of accounts so that they compress to give you that information. More detail doesn't necessarily mean more accuracy. So one of the things we've done with several of our clients is we've taken an unwieldy chart of accounts and we've made subheadings. So we'll take a chunk of 25 accounts and put it in something that appears on the financial statements like administration or something like that. So that will just take a whole bunch of information and put it at a level that board members want to see. And often you will have, we'll often have two different types of reports. We'll have a summarized report that will go to the board of directors, and we'll have a more detailed report that will go to the executive director. And then I mentioned this earlier, if users do want more information, how much have we bought from Polaris Plumbing for repairs and maintenance in the first 6 months, you can just tweak QuickBooks to find that and do a simplified report for you. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of the chart of accounts area. So you can find that by going to accounting and then your chart of accounts, and you can, this will give you the list. And then if you want to create a new account to give you a subheading, you'll just tweak up there. And you can see in this case, it's creating a sub account of insurance, but you could create a header account here and then put all the sub accounts underneath it.
Exactly. As you might see on the left-hand side in the background here, there's 5 insurance accounts, and what's hidden behind there is you have the main insurance account, but then you have insurance car, insurance general, insurance swimming, or whatever. And really, they don't need to be their own headings. Instead, if you create a subheading, you can just summarize all of that under insurance, and then when you create a collapsed report, all of these insurance accounts get summarized into one.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Yeah, and also to tie back to our title presentation, how to make your financial statement audit proof. The board is there to help you review your books, and the ED is there to make sure there's accuracy. So if your chart of accounts is too complicated, it makes it really hard for the board to actually help you by reviewing the financials. So if you give them an understandable financial statement, they can actually understand what's going on. And if they have questions, they can always ask later. And so in that way, you're giving yourself a better chance to catch mistakes before it goes through an audit.
And I might just add to that, Bob, is one of the things that you can do at your board to make sure that you have a clean audit is ask questions when the treasurer is giving the report. If something looks weird, just ask the question, because it could be something that they've missed, or if it doesn't make sense to you, it's probably not making sense to someone else too.
Yeah.
Okay, so internal controls over expenses. Okay, is this me? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is my section too. Okay, so this is, okay, so you want to make sure that you have complete documentation. If you're having an audit, the auditors are going to make a selection and they're going to ask for documentation. So you don't know what they're going to ask for, so you have to keep support for everything. And one of the things that QuickBooks is really good at is it allows you to attach the receipts and bills right onto the transaction, and I love this feature. So that means you don't have to scan and upload things and put them into directories. You can just scan it once and it's there, and you can find it whenever you want. The other thing that is we find useful are 2 apps Receipt Bank and Expensify. Bob, do you want to tell us about these?
Yeah, so Receipt Bank and Expensify are both receipt management tools, so to speak. You can Google them and find them. Receipt Bank is really good for when you're spending. Let's say you have a charity credit card and your executive director is on the road. They're spending money on the charity credit card, and they would take photos of the receipts that they incur, and all of that gets pushed to Receipt Bank, where you can categorize and then publish to QuickBooks Online. And in that process, the actual receipt, the image of the receipts, get attached to QuickBooks Online. So it's a very good documentation tool. Expensify, we found, is incredible at managing employee expense reports. So if you have an executive director using their own credit card, or admin that uses his own credit card, then they can submit their own expenses through Expensify, and again attach the actual receipts. And when you publish to QBO, QuickBooks Online, all the receipts get attached. So another comment with internal controls is using something like Pluto or WayPay in this case to add multiple layers of authorization. So a typical way of getting checks signed is printing off the bill, printing off the check, stapling it, getting two board members to come on site to actually sign checks. And it's just a very, very frustrating process, and it's very paper-based as well. So with WayPay, what you can do is actually create those expenses in QuickBooks. Those get synchronized to WayPay, and then the bookkeeper or the accountant or the admin can actually initiate payment. And then the board members can actually approve those payments anywhere in the world, and money just goes out. Again, this is a multiple layer authorization process that can be used for board members that are not always in town. This is especially important, let's say in the summertime, where all the board members go away and you don't have enough signers to actually get the checks out. So the payroll audit process is you can also use QuickBooks to manage that. So in the process, make sure you have proper employee contracts, and if there are contractors, ensure you have those contracts as well. So at this moment, just make sure you actually go through the exercise to ensure if they are actually contractors or if they're actually employees. Because if they're employees and you pay them like contractors, you can really be penalized heavily. Sometimes you have departments. So if your payroll is broken down to departments, ensure you have backups on how you calculated those. So for example, an executive director, she spends half her time in department A, half her time in department B, and that payroll cost is separated half and half. Just make sure you have an Excel ledger that backs up that calculation, because as the auditor goes through your payroll line, they will need to they will want to ask for that.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Bob, on that employee versus contractor issue. Yeah, a lot of people ask the question, what is the penalty if I pay them, like, are they contractor, are they employee? So the risk associated with classifying them correctly resides with the payor. So there's no risk taken by the contractor or employee. So it's to their best interest to do what suits them. But the penalty is if you pay them as a contractor and CRA deems them to be an employee, which means you set all or you have control over them. If CRA deems them to be your employee, then you are responsible for all their payroll deductions, including their portion of it. So that's the penalty.
Plus interest.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And here's an example of where you can attach it. So let's say we're creating a check. This is a screen for QuickBooks Online and where you actually create the check. And you see at the bottom here, there's an attachment section. So what you can do is actually, as in the process of creating this check, you can actually upload or drag and drop the associated bill. Okay, so that's how you keep great records. Sometimes you want to have a special journal entry. So let's say you want to make a year-end adjustment, or like I said, the payroll adjustment. The adjustments are usually done through journal entry. So in this case, you can actually upload the Excel file to this journal entry, so that when the auditor has a question about this journal entry, you're not digging around to find that Excel document. It's already here attached.
Okay, and yeah, I think I alluded to this a bit earlier. So this is an issue, documentation and compliance of grant requirements. So the big issue with charities, and this is what the CRA wants when they audit you, they want to make sure, and also the external auditors, they want to make sure that you are doing what your grantors, donors, contributors want you to. So that's the issue. So, oops, in order to facilitate this process, step one, keep all your grant compliance agreements and know where to find them. Second, read them. Ensure you understand what you're supposed to do in order to get this money and what the money is allowed to be spent on. Don't get double funding for the same program. Okay, so I was telling Bob about a case a couple of years ago. I had a client who was, they were raising money for an emergency vehicle, and so they went all around the community and got lots of funding. They ended up getting 120% of the vehicle funded. And so they were super happy that they had more money than the vehicle cost, but were not so happy when they found out that they had to give it back because the money had to be used only for the emergency vehicle. So, and then in order to keep your records, a good idea is, like Bob just showed us, attaching the grant document in QuickBooks Online where you see the deposit for the funds coming in.
Jean, if you can just quickly clarify, I think I had a hang up on returning funds back to the donors.
Yeah.
In this case, you're not talking about restricted donations, you're talking about government grants or corporate grants to a specific program,
no,
right?
This can be restricted donations as well. So this is
but you can't give back restricted donations.
Yes.
Oh, you can. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a sponsor, and they say, here's 5,000. It's to be used for the emergency vehicle, but they've already raised all the money. So guess what? That's the only thing it can be used for. It's externally restricted.
Okay.
Okay. So and yeah. So this also is part of that. Do not commingle your externally restricted funds. So if money's coming in, you want to make sure that you know how much has come from this community organization, how much has come from that. And especially if you've got different programs, you want to make sure that you're not commingling one program to another. This creates a bookkeeper's hornet's nest. So you can avoid that by setting up different classes within QuickBooks for different projects. So you've got your emergency vehicle, you've got your whatever else they have, their other equipment, their ropes and rescue equipment in this case. Then you don't want to transfer funds from one account to another without documentation of the appropriate approvals. So the approvals, if it's externally restricted, comes from the donor. If it's internally restricted, it comes from the board. It's not necessary to open a separate bank account for each fund, but you need to keep separate appropriate records, and you can use classes. And some grantors do require you to keep a separate bank account, like the BC Gaming Society.
So the keeping of the records. Generally speaking, it's best to keep them for at least 7 years. I think the rule is 6 years after the last calendar year or whatever. But basically what that means is, yeah, 7 years. So keep records of property, plant, and equipment purchases. So that just means anything capital that you capitalize in your charity attached to the transaction itself. So previously we saw examples of attaching the bills to the actual, attaching the expenses to the actual bills. So in this case, use that feature to do that. Keep records of insurance, and again, keep for 7 years, separate folders for each grant, okay? Ensure donation receipts are compliant with the CRA requirements. So we're gonna show that in a bit. But if you just Google CRA donation receipts, you'll get a whole list of all the little things that you need to include in the charity receipt for it to be legal for your donors to claim that receipt. Here are some tools to keep your records. Again, Receipt Bank and Expensify are great. Not only do they push those transactions into QuickBooks, they actually keep that data for 7 years on their servers as well. So if you ever need to go back, it's going to be there. The question that I get often is, does CRA accept digital records? Now, this is still up for debate, but from a lot of other bookkeepers that I've seen, the CRA is okay with photos of receipts. So they don't want you to, digitally generate a receipt, but since they're not actually recreating the receipt, let's say you go to a Starbucks and have a purchase receipt. If you take a photo of that, it's a digital copy of an actual receipt. So they're okay with that. But again, to be safe, you might as well just file it for 7 years in its actual paper form. If you're using a donor management system, such as Kindly, Donaris or whatever, and you're keeping the donation tracking separate from your accounting system, make sure to reconcile it monthly. What that means is you print off all the donations you generate in the accounting software and all the donations received in the donor management software. Make sure those two numbers are exactly the same. That's what the auditors are going to look for. And here are some common errors. So one of the errors that we've seen is don't net revenues against expenses. So for example, you run a program, let's say a trip to India, and you raise money for that trip and you spend money in that trip, and then the revenues and expenses are actually tracked in one chart of accounts called trip to India. So you're essentially recording them as net. So it may be okay for internal purposes, but for financial statement purposes, they need to be separated, and so track them separately.
I see this often, Bob, in when people get the funding for students. The government funding for students often gets netted against payroll, and it can't. It needs to be disclosed as a revenue item.
Right. Don't record pledges as revenues until received. This is different than grants. Grants are legal documents. What this means is just, what's the percentage of likelihood that the pledges actually come in? So when people make a pledge, it's a promise, right? And from individuals, it's hard to chase down, and they might renege on that promise. But a grant is a legal document. So the government signs a grant, is on a contract with you to deliver funds for you to deliver service. So if you have pledges, you don't record them as revenues, but if you receive a grant, you would. Gifts in kind, over $1,000 must be appraised. Jean, how would you get something like that appraised?
Well, you'd have to phone a qualified appraiser, who would probably charge you $800. But yeah, it has to be a specific qualified appraiser. So you just have to find someone to do that.
So sometimes it might be, easier if someone just sells the item and just gives you cash. Yeah, exactly, that way it's cleaner. And then donation for service is not allowed. So the CRA recommends performing a check exchange where the let's say the auditor wants to donate their services, which may or may not ever happen. They would perform the service and they would bill you, and you'd pay for it, and that same dollar amount gets donated to the charity as a check. That's an actual exchange of cash, right? So that's what's recommended, because then you have a paper trail and it's nice and clean. Did you have anything to add on this one?
No, that's great. Yes.
Great. And so here is a list of all the receipts that, items you need to have on the charity receipts. Again, you can just Google this, but basically you'd have a serial number, registration number with CRA, that's your charity number, location, date, year, date of the receipt, full name, including middle initials. A lot of people still miss this. Address of the donors, amount of the gift, amount of description of any advantages received by the donor. Do you want to explain what advantages mean?
Well, if you just click here, I didn't actually click there.
Okay. No, advantages means do they get any benefit from this transaction, right? So let's say, for example, they go to a gala and the ticket costs $100, but like the meal itself costs $30. So you would issue a receipt for $100 with $30 as an advantage. So basically what it's saying is that we're telling the CRA that this donor can only receive $70 worth of charitable donation credits. Okay, and the name and website of the charity of the CRA. So this is actually very important. You need to have the charity website on the donation receipts, or else it's actually not claimable, legal. All right, so that was us talking for 30 whole minutes.
Wow.
I know, right? Love to welcome any questions at this point. And you can also find us on Facebook, Legacy Advantage, or email us if you have any specific ones.
So thank you so much, Bob and Jean, for your very informative and also very casual and engaging presentation. I really loved your back and forth there. It was really
Cool.
really conversational and nice. So everyone, we now have some time to take questions from the audience. So if you haven't entered your questions yet, please do so now by using the questions chat box in your GoToWebinar panel. We've had some questions coming in throughout the presentation, so we'll start with those, but you can feel free to continue populating our question box. So Bob and Jean, we are going to start with a question from Andrew. Early on in your presentation, you talked about collecting signed papers for cash collections. What should nonprofits do with those signed papers once they've collected them?
So you mean, okay, so I guess what Andrew's talking about is we've got someone collecting cash and we've got someone counting it with them and they initial it. So you want to file those within your cash collection section of your deposits, so that when you get audited at the end of the year, a person can say, okay, this is what 2 people said was counted, and that agrees to the amount that got deposited into the bank. Does that make sense? Well, I guess Andrew can't answer.
Yeah, and I would say if you wanted to file it digitally, you can always scan and attach it to the QuickBooks transaction, because when you're recording the deposit into your QuickBooks, you got to create a transaction, right? And every transaction has the ability for you to attach something, and so this is something you can attach as well.
And that's actually a very good question, very good segue to a question that we had come in from Ramon, who asks, can we maintain scanned copies of expenditure backup, such as receipts, vouchers, tabs, etc., instead of using paper copies?
Yeah, and so I think I addressed this at the very end. So basically, can the CRA accept digital copies? From my experience and from actually a lot of my colleagues' experience, the CRA is okay with accepting scanned copies of physical receipts or even photos of physical receipts. So I would say, I don't think the CRA came out and directly said that, but just from all the documents that they requested, they've been okay with having a USB stick with all the documents in there. So again, I would say, keep it digital, but just in case, file it away in a simple filing system. And sometimes I recommend my clients say, look, have 12 folders, 1 for each month, and just put everything in there, and then digitize it at the same time. So if in the event that they don't accept the actual digital receipts, you can actually go back to the month and find the actual item. Just that's a good compromise between, vendor-based system where it's super complicated and not having any system at all.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, I have never found, and unless that's changed since the 6 months I've been here, I never found anything printed that said they would accept digital. But by the same token, I've never, in all my years of having CRA audits with my clients, I've never seen them reject digital copies. So
that's a relief.
Yes.
Yes.
So going back to the first part of the presentation when we were talking about cash, Margaret Ramos asks, should volunteers that are handling cash go through a police clearance?
I don't know that the police clearance actually gives any comfort on cash. It's more about kids, and as far as I know. So
I think the short answer is no, because I mean, at the end of the day, you wouldn't put someone that you don't trust in that position anyway. And I think our point is that you want to remove temptation as much as possible. Someone may go through a police check and they may have no criminal record, but it doesn't mean they won't commit their first one, right? So you just want to limit as much opportunity for temptation as possible.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So this question comes from Wahid. Wahid says, nonprofit organizations do not recover 100% of HST paid. In our case, we recover 50% of federal HST and 82% of provincial HST. As far as I know, QuickBooks is not able to do this type of calculation automatically and set up HST recoverable at the time of entering invoice in QuickBooks. Do you know of any solution?
Yeah, it's a good question. So thankfully we're in BC, and we deal with GST, PST portion, which means the PST is totally non-refundable. but only 50% is recoverable for GST. For the HST environment, yeah, I would say just, I would say even record it at the full amount at the end of every year, manually adjust the full amount into the recoverable and non-recoverable portion. Jim, would you have any?
Or just create a hack account, a GST that's the portion that it works out to when you do that, much as we do for our.
Yeah, so in QuickBooks, you can actually create what they call an inclusive rate. So for example, if we want to claim back 50% of GST, we would create a tax code account that has 2.439% as recoverable with GST. What that means is, let's say you have a full amount of $105. If we multiply that by 2.439, we get the actual exact amount had we backed out the 5% and backed out the $5 and taken 50% of that. So you can actually work backwards and create a formula that maybe creates one inclusive rate and that you can use.
We used to have HST here in BC, but that was before your time.
No, come on. That was just 3-4 years ago.
So we have a series of technical questions from a bunch of different people around the differences between QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online. I'm not sure if you two are able to speak to the differences between the two, but a lot of people are asking, can you use QuickBooks Desktop to attach image files and digital copies of receipts and stuff like that? And is there a big functional difference if you're using the desktop version versus using the online platform?
Yeah, I mean, they are, it's a hard question. They are different and they are the same. Like the basic features are the same. You can create a bill, you can create an expense, you can create invoices, that kind of stuff. But the user interface and how you work it and all the buttons, they're kind of all in different places. So it does take time to get used to. In terms of functionality, I would say they're about 80% the same. QuickBooks Online is still a pretty young product, and it does still have quite some bugs, but the team is working on it, and we've been able to find workarounds and basically patches to resolve these issues. In terms of attaching documents in QuickBooks Desktop, you can, but it's actually not great. If you go to the actual expense and the top bar, there's actually a place where you can attach it. But the problem is, every time you attach an image file, you're actually making the QuickBooks Desktop file bigger. And so over the course of 1, 2, 3, 4 years, your QuickBooks Desktop file becomes like 2, 3, 4 gigabytes, and it just becomes really, really heavy. And it's not ideal. With QuickBooks Online, you have basically unlimited storage, and you can attach as much as you want. And it doesn't slow down the file because it's cloud-based, right? All that data is on a cloud server somewhere. So that's kind of the main difference in terms of attaching files.
And so for our listeners who are using QuickBooks Desktop, what kind of workarounds do you suggest for dealing with file attachments and everything, as to make sure that the footprint of the actual product doesn't get too large to manage?
Well, I used desktop for years and a lot of charity clients, and we never did attach because the charities files tend to get quite big anyway. So all we did is we created subfolders for the different types of it that basically matched the financial statements, and the records just went into the subfolders.
So you have one folder called cash, and you would put all the deposits there. You'd have one folder called grants, and you put all the grants there. You put all the bills. So travel. Yeah, you could travel. You have a travel expense. You put all the travel receipts there. So you kind of mimic the financial statement, but in a folder system as opposed to attaching documents. And just to kind of add a comment there, if you guys do want to switch from desktop to online, that process is actually quite seamless. And you can actually go to the company button and go to the bottom and it says export to QuickBooks Online, and that process is automatic, and you retain all the history. So that's why we chose to focus on QuickBooks Online, because we have a lot of companies in Canada that use QuickBooks Desktop, and the integration, the transition to QBO is seamless, and it retains all the historical data. So that's what we like about it.
But you can't go back.
You can't go back from online to desktop. That's right. Once you're on, you're on.
I see. Okay.
And TechSoup, do you guys have a discount with QuickBooks Online?
Online? Yes, we do. Not with online, but with the desktop version.
Got it.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So here's a question, just sort of a general question about organizational culture. So, we're talking specifically about ways to upload receipts and stuff like that, but then moving out to like a broader kind of people-to-people perspective, what can nonprofits do to encourage everyone on the team to make audit-proof bookkeeping a priority?
I think it's got to start from the top, as in the board. And so that speaks to our point of having a knowledgeable board, because if the board doesn't even know what they want, then the ED won't know what they want, et cetera, et cetera. And so from a cultural perspective, it's got to start with the treasurer even, or the chairperson, to say, look, we want to have clean books. That's our priority. Why? Because our donors rely on us to make sure we are good stewards of their finances. And one of the ways we do that is making sure that we have clean and audited books. So I would say, it's a priority that the board needs to have, and then that priority gets communicated to the executive director, and then to the bookkeeper, and from that point on, you'd have proper internal controls, monthly reviews, quarterly check-ins, and so on and so forth.
Okay. We have a question from Marion about using Sage. I'm not sure if you all can speak to a different accounting platform than QuickBooks, but do you know if Sage has the same ability to upload receipts?
I don't know. We don't use Sage.
Okay.
I don't know at all.
I would be surprised if they didn't, but I don't know.
Yeah. But that being said, what you can do is actually use things like Receipt Bank or Expensify independently of Sage, right? You can still digitize receipts and create expense reports and just file them away, either in the system or in your folder, but just do the record keeping in Sage separately.
Okay. Kathy asks, is there a way for the bookkeeper to pay bills electronically via online banking instead of by check, because there isn't the accountability of two to sign?
Yeah, so we actually don't even recommend paying bills through online banking, because that gives the bookkeeper access, basically unlimited access to the charity's banking. And that again comes back to our first point of removing the temptation. We want to remove temptation from these bookkeepers, so they don't have access to the cash, nor do they have access to online banking. So we recommend using a third-party software. One we recommend is called WayPay. Another one is called Pluto, Plooto. And we have a lot of charities that actually also use Telpay. All those three systems connect to the bank account, and in that connection process, you need dual signatures. And then you can have multiple authorities. So let's say the bookkeeper initiates the payment, and the board members will get an email to go ahead and check their portal. And then at that moment, they can approve or not approve or ask questions in that process. And once two board members approve that actual transaction, money just then automatically goes out.
So Katie asks, and I understand why she's asking this. She says, is there a general consensus that QuickBooks is the best accounting software to use, and why? And so I will just hedge here a bit and say, we as a nonprofit organization ourselves know that QuickBooks is a very effective and popular digital platform, but it's certainly not the only one out there. And this webinar is not intended to be a sales pitch for everyone to go out and buy QuickBooks, but we wanted to basically just speak to a tool that many people are using in the hopes of giving them some best practices to get the most effective use out of that tool. So all of that kind of hedging aside, if this is your preferred tool, can you explain why it is, what the functionality that makes it better, and what are some of the challenges that are within this particular platform?
Yeah, that's right. Ben, I would totally agree with you. QuickBooks is not the only solution. It's just a solution that Legacy Advantage has chosen, and it's one platform that we use for almost all of our clients. And so it comes down to efficiency. We don't want to be experts in Sage and QuickBooks. We just want to be experts in one and be really, really good at that. Sorry, you had a follow-up question.
What are some of the challenges that you've encountered, or some of the functionality that you you have seen that QuickBooks either is lacking or is in the process of adding or glitches or anything like that?
Not for profits, but profit-oriented ones. There's some progress billing and whatnot, which is coming up soon. But not for profits, I think it does a pretty good job.
Yeah, and I when I first started off, I had to choose a software to go with, and I just felt that QuickBooks Online is a cloud-based software which allows better cooperation and allows for integration with other apps. So QuickBooks Desktop doesn't integrate with nearly as many applications such as Pluto, WayPay, Rotessa, Receipt Bank, Expensify. So all those integrations can help you create a very digitized process, right? So for us, that efficiency was a really big component. That's one of the reasons why we chose it. In terms of deficiencies, like Jean said, there's not one thing that's specific to nonprofits that QuickBooks is not good at, but rather, the payroll module is pretty weak in QuickBooks Online. So we actually don't run payroll through QuickBooks Online. Instead, we use things like Payworks to outsource that payroll to a payroll software provider to streamline that process.
So Sal is asking that their nonprofit is looking to hire an office person. Should we be looking for someone with no QuickBooks experience, some experience, or fully knowledgeable with QuickBooks? And I guess broadly the question would be, is this something, is familiarity with this particular platform a must when hiring? Is it something that people can be trained on? Or is it something secondary and not necessary to hire for?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, it's not as simple as that, though. I think obviously you want a bookkeeper that understands bookkeeping or an office manager that understands bookkeeping. But the next important thing is how good are they at software in general, at picking up software. So they can be great at bookkeeping, but they might say, look, I've always used Sage, I will never use anything else. So you want someone that's flexible. If a person is somewhat computer literate and adaptable, QuickBooks Online is easy to learn. So that's not the most important thing.
Right, and I would add to that, and I think hiring an office manager, I think what's more important is their knowledge of charity accounting more so than the software, because the software is just a tool, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And if you know how to use it, then it's going to be really awesome. If you don't, it doesn't really impact you. The most important thing is that they understand charity accounting and know how to account for things like restricted funds, classes, and all those kind of things. So that's the most important piece, because at the end of the day, every accounting software has a journal entry function. So even if they don't know how to use the majority of the features, they can always enter a journal entry.
Mm-hmm. We have another question about WayPay, and does WayPay work with the QuickBooks Desktop? If it doesn't, is there an alternative?
I think it does.
I think it does too.
Yeah, we were at our conference and they said that they do. We haven't tested that feature out yet because we're mainly using QuickBooks Online, but that's what they said they did.
So Ramon has another desktop question. If all of the records and bookkeeping happens for an organization with multiple sites, should they maintain multiple desktop versions by site? Or should it all be centralized in one location?
So I think it really depends on organizational structure. So if this entity is one registered entity with 5 locations, then it should all be in one file with the location feature turned on. So
I think it's desktop we're using.
Oh, desktop still, do they not have location function?
I don't think so.
Okay, so here's another reason why you should use QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online, it kind of has 2 dimensions. One is the classes. The other dimension is the locations. So you can have locations and classes kind of on the X and Y axis. And so if you have 5 different locations, you need to have the same file. I'd highly recommend that because legally it is one entity, right? And in terms of the actual bookkeeping, again, if we use QuickBooks Online, you can actually have 5 different people log into QuickBooks at the same time one from each location doing their own bookkeeping, but all in one system. So that's another benefit of having a cloud-based accounting software.
Right, and that's the advantage of using cloud-based anything really within organizations with more than one or two people, is the ability to work in real-time collaboration.
That's right. I've actually seen a hack with QuickBooks Desktop where you would upload the QuickBooks Desktop to a remote server, and then you have 5 people remoting in from different locations. So that works as well. So it's kind of a cloud 1.0, if you will, hack to using QuickBooks Desktop in a multiple location environment.
Let's see. I'm just going through some of the comments that we've received so far. I think we've done a pretty good job of covering, if not specific questions, then sort of broad strokes for people who are interested in doing this. Somebody's asking if TechSoup Canada will be providing discounts for QuickBooks Online anytime soon. We don't know. That's up to QuickBooks as a donor partner. There's definitely demand for it, so we hope that happens in the future, but we can't commit to it yet. But we do offer access to QuickBooks Desktop, which you can access by going to TechSoupCanada.ca and going to our product catalog and sorting by donor partner and going through Intuit and into QuickBooks. Bob and Jean, as we filter through some of the remaining questions, is there any other topics you'd like to cover, or best practices, or sort of general advice, or specific comments based on what we've talked about today?
Not thinking of any.
Yeah. We talked about how to make the books audit proof. That's basically on the assumption that you are already going through an audit, or if you are planning to go through an audit. In our experience, we found that sometimes a review is sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
It's much less prep work, it's much less costly. And so if you want, you can have a conversation with the board and say, look, we've been doing audits in the past, it's costing us $10,000 a year. What if we did a review, because we've had clean audits for the past 3-4 years? Maybe we can save some time, save some cost. So that's an option as well for you to mention to your board.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and in terms of documentation, it's the same. You should still follow the same procedure and documentation and accounting process and all of that, but it's less onerous for everybody.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's a great note to go out on. We really appreciate, Bob and Jean, that you took your time out of your day to share knowledge with us. It was certainly informative. And I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today for taking time out of your day. So just a reminder that we'll be posting the recording of the webinar along with slides and a recap to our website by next Monday, probably earlier than that, at least for the recording and the slides. Everyone, if you're still with us, please do fill out the brief post-webinar survey that will launch right after this session. If you have any additional questions, or if you would like Bob and Jean to get in touch with you or us at TechSoup Canada. If you have any other questions, that's a great platform for sharing it as well. So once again, thank you everyone who's joined us, and please enjoy the rest of your day and the holiday season.